Am I living in a fantasy? Am I living in a fantasy? I wanna go deep, deep, deep in your jungle. I wanna get lost, lost, lost in your arms. I wanna feel high, high, high on your vibe. I wanna feel love, love, love in my life. You are my roots, roots, roots. You are my water. You are my air, air, air. You are my fire. You make me I. You make me I.
So we praise you. We honor you. We love you, Mother Earth.
Aloha and welcome to the Ripple Effect podcast, where we talk story with inspiring women who are creating ripples of positive change on our planet. I'm your hostess, Noelani Love, and I invite you to open up your mind to the alternative ideas and possibilities presented in this podcast. I hope you enjoy the show. Aloha and welcome to the Ripple Effect podcast. I'm your hostess, Noelani Love, and I'm broadcasting from the North Shore of Oahu, and I'm so honored today to feature our guest, Debra Pascali-Bonaro, who is the founder of Orgasmic Birth. I'm going to say that again. You heard me correctly. Orgasmic Birth. Debra, go ahead and introduce yourself and share with us how you became the founder of Orgasmic Birth and what does that mean?
Oh, well, first of all, thank you so much, Noelani. It is truly such an honor and pleasure to be here with you and all your tribe that are joining us. So a little bit about how Orgasmic Birth was birthed, literally, is I've been a doula for 34 years, a childbirth educator, and a really passionate birth activist to really create birth equity and reduce disparities and just bring more joy, love, connection, and pleasure and safety to everyone who's birthing around the world. And in all my work, I was always looking at the television and like yelling at the birth shows because I almost felt like they had the music of Jaws underneath a birth, like you were waiting for like the shark to come. And I was like, birth isn't like that. They're lying. They're not showing us the truth, and they're instilling fear rather than confidence and joy. So I think in my subconscious mind, like all that yelling at the media and the perceptions manifested in truly a dream. And I was sound asleep and had this beautiful dream of creating a documentary that was filled with love and the connection that birth has as both physical, emotional, spiritual, sacred, sexual. And I literally woke my husband up at 2 a.m. and shook him and said, Jimmy, I have to make a film. And he laughed and said, go back to sleep and have another dream. But it was so powerful because like I really saw myself making this, that when I woke in the morning, it just sent me on this quest. And I always know you don't have to know how to do everything in life, but we're all 1 degree of separation from the people that do. So Orgasmic Birth really put me on the path to find the people that wanted to both share their powerful, pleasurable, and orgasmic births and those that could help us put the film together. And that film really became a movement. We now have gone around the world. It's a book and so much more, but it has a huge message. 1, follow your dreams. And hopefully beyond that, we're really opening up the deeper discussion that I think is so important, is that birth is such a huge part of who we are, and so much more is possible than what we've given voice to in mainstream culture.
I love that. I totally agree. I feel like for me as a mother, my birth experience with my son was the most powerful experience that I've ever had as a woman, as a human in my lifetime of being on this planet. And like the power of that, the joy, the pleasure of that experience is something that's not talked about a lot. And in my childhood, I was brought up with the idea that birth is scary, it's traumatic, it's fearful, it's painful, it's an emergency, you know, like hospitals are for sick people, dying people, and emergencies. And birth is the most natural thing, and that's how we all got here. People are continuing to make babies, so it can't be that traumatic. I mean, not to discount, of course, there are many traumatic births, but how much of that trauma is created by the way we're shaped or conditioned to believe birth is supposed to be. And I have a question for you, for those of the listeners who might not know what the word doula is, because you said the word doula, and I remember hearing that word when I was pregnant and being like, what's a doula? Wait, home birth is possible? People give birth at home? That's crazy. And then I ended up getting a doula and having a home birth with a midwife. And I didn't really know what that was when I was pregnant. So if you are listening and you're pregnant and you're thinking, well, how could I have an orgasmic birth? Like I've never considered that before. Could I have a midwife? Could I have a doula? Could I have a home birth? All of those are possible to anyone if you choose so.
Yes, so important to say that. And, you know, doulas, a lot of people think are very new, but I just finished teaching a doula workshop, and we were talking so much about, as you know, doulas are really ancient. When we look at what I say is the her story, the female version of birth through the ages, and we look at birth art from every culture and country around the world, we always see a circle of women, and those often were mothers, mother-in-laws, sisters, best friends, neighbors that came together because birth was a part of the social fabric of the family, and there was always a midwife there to catch or receive the baby in front, this circle of women that offered support, and not to honor our partners, male, whatever gender, partners were always there, but they often were in the outer circle. They were being the protector of the bigger environment. And we're now learning that this female companionship that many of our great grandmothers just had as part of the way birth was really a missing link when we moved birth into the hospital. And doulas, their emotional support, their comfort, not being a part of the medical team, but there for your emotional and physical comfort and well-being, significantly improve birth outcomes, which is so amazing that we're finally honoring that human connection has a huge impact on our physical health and well-being.
100%. I totally agree on that. And as you shared, Debra, doulas are ancient, and the word is a Greek word, right? Doula means servant, if I'm not mistaken. And so the doula is there to serve the woman in labor as the emotional support. No medical training or support is necessary to be a doula. And that's actually how you and I met, is at the Eat, Pray doula training a few years ago in Bali in Indonesia with Robin Lim, who is an amazing midwife. If you don't know who she is, I hope to feature her on the podcast as well. She co-led this Eat, Pray doula retreat in Bali, and you do it every year, annually, and hopefully that will continue with what's happening. I know you had to take a pause this year because of COVID. Yeah. But it was such a special gathering of women. We had, I want to say, about 25 women from different countries all over the world. And what a beautiful experience to share our different cultures and practices around birthing and ideas. And also the forward-moving thought that birth can be peaceful, birth can be beautiful, birth can be orgasmic. And let's talk about that more. So I know our listeners are like, well, what about orgasmic birth? It's supposed to be painful and scary. Let's talk about the orgasmic experience and how you feel that is involved in the birth process.
So I think birth has always had an element of love, joy, ecstasy, pleasure, but we've lost touch with that, right? So I think it's hard to imagine in our current hospital system, it's sometimes hard to imagine the kind of pleasure that can be available in birth. And I often say, certainly our hospitals, and now more than ever, right? I want to honor our doctors, our nurses, our midwives. They're all doing amazing, blessed work and a great job. But overall, what we're even learning more right now in this uncertain time is that our maternity care system and our medical system has some cracks in it. And it's those cracks, it's like there's almost like a dysfunction in the system. And if people have ever worked in a dysfunctional organization, you know, good people get taken down. So our medical system has actually like overused valuable resources where so many things can be life-saving. Applying them to everybody is not the best idea. And we so got overtaken with medicine that we've often lost touch with the heart, the hands, the compassion, the respect, the love. And so for some people, I know you're saying, wait, how is this possible? We have to change the system, and this is the perfect time to heal the system. But when we look at places, particularly with doctors or midwives who really support the hormones of birth, who support an environment where they honor birth as physical, emotional, spiritual, sacred, and yes, sexual. And so they allow you to prepare in all these ways. There are so many things we can do to really honor that powerful, sensuous nature of birth. So I just want to say to people that Orgasmic Birth, Elizabeth Davis, another great midwife, and I co-authored the book Orgasmic Birth. And there we define it that orgasmic birth is anyone who experiences joy, pleasure, love, ecstasy in birth. Anyone that takes their power in birth and is a part of decision making. Anyone who goes as far as having a birth orgasm, or what we call a birthgasm. But that's not to say like, my births were orgasmic and I didn't have a birthgasm. But for me, they were filled with love, that moment of release when your baby slides out of your body into your hands and you look in their eyes. That's orgasmic. Just like for me, piece of dark chocolate can be orgasmic. So orgasmic birth is available for everyone. I wouldn't want anyone to say having a birthgasm is like a performance standard, like a birthgasm should be on your birth plan or preferences. No, that would be way too much to put on us all. But I do think we all can experience a birth with more love, more joy, more pleasure, more connection. And for the people that are blessed to have a birthgasm, they should know it's a normal physiologic process. Too many people have come up to me over the years and truly told me that they didn't even tell their partner that they had a birthgasm, nor their best friend, nor anyone. I was the first person because they were so shamed into thinking something was wrong with them that they would feel pleasure when everyone else talks about pain. So I think we must honor that whether you're hoping for an orgasmic birth or nature gives it to you, it's something we need to talk about.
I love that. Thank you for sharing. Yeah, I can understand that idea of feeling shameful about something because it's not the norm, and not wanting to make your friends or other people feel bad because you've had a good experience. And that's kind of come up for me with this COVID experience. Like, I'm loving the social distancing personally because I'm such an introvert. A lot of people think I'm actually an extrovert because I do share a lot, but like, I thrive on alone time. I love to have Noe time where I can be creative and nobody's talking to me or distracting me. That's when I feel at my most creative and most thought-provoking within myself. I can be very reflective. So that's very helpful. I wanted to touch on what you said a little bit about experiencing the pleasure and the joy and how that can be considered an orgasmic birth, because maybe there are a lot more people that are actually having orgasmic births and they can share that. Like, now that you say you shared all of that, I'm thinking, well, I had an orgasmic birth. Like, it was so beautiful. It was so joyful. Of course, it was challenging and it was labor. There were a lot of sounds coming out of me that were sounds that I'd never heard my body make before. I didn't know I was capable of. And at one point I remember thinking, there's got to be another way to get this baby out of my body, and like wanting to give up. And of course, that's the transition stage where I was so close, and a lot of moms out there that may be listening to this podcast know, like, a lot of times right when it's time for the baby to come out and you're like, I can't do it any longer, I give up, but you're there, you're right there, you're on the edge. And so, yeah, I had an orgasmic birth. Who knew? That's amazing.
That's what an orgasmic birth, I think, is everybody's birthright. And I'm glad you said it doesn't mean that we don't have challenge. It doesn't mean that we don't have pain. You know, some people will tell me they had a pain-free birth, or pain wasn't a descriptive word. But other people will say to me, it was the most painful day of my life. And then I had this moment of ecstasy. So it's not saying, you know, life is full of all kinds of emotions, and it's in holding them all that we really celebrate them all. So I love that you had an orgasmic birth too.
Yeah. I had an orgasmic birth. I'm gonna start telling everybody now. I think it's so true too, because like, as sexual beings, even in the orgasmic experience with a partner, it's like this yin and yang, it's this push and pull, and there's this, it's like work and challenging, and it's pleasurable and painful, not painful in a bad way, but it's like, it's just work. And there's so much comparison to the birth experience to sex and intercourse. And I think that's what this is really about, is when women are birthing their babies, it's all the same parts of the body that are involved in the sexual experience. It's a full body experience. The organs in our reproductive system are the same ones that are working as if you were in the sexual intercourse experience or making love. And I think there's so much, you know, with the nipple stimulation that a lot of doulas and midwives and even doctors know. Nipple stimulation helps to open up the cervix so that the babies can come down and out. And I think that, you know, obviously that's happening in a sexual relation as well. Not always, if that's not happening, but it is possible, and that's stimulating to the body. And so it's really interesting when we really put the science together. And I wanted to ask you a little bit more, if you could share about oxytocin and how that works, because that is the love hormone, I know. And yeah, please do share about the chemistry of oxytocin.
I'd be honored to. And just as you said, I mean, birth is a part of our sexuality. Not only are all the same sexual organs involved that are pleasurable and intimate, but also the same hormones. And, you know, anything that would block you from having an intimate and pleasurable sexual experience alone or with a partner will block you in birth. Because our body, when it produces hormones, it needs the same situation, no matter if you're being intimate and sexual or if you're giving birth, because birth is sexual. So when you think about it, oxytocin, the hormone of love, happens when we have eye contact, when we are being touched in a way that feels safe and caressing. As you said, in nipple stimulation, in masturbation, orgasm is a real height of oxytocin release. And so when we're giving birth, oxytocin is the hormone that both mother-baby must produce. And we produce it in our brain, in our hypothalamus, and dripping into our pituitary. And brain oxytocin actually is a great pain reliever. It gives us a sense of calm, well-being, love. That euphoric feeling after orgasm is the height of that brain oxytocin. But what's amazing is, before we begin labor 24 to 48 hours before, we actually grow new oxytocin receptors on our uterus. Like, that amazes me. Our bodies are miraculous that they're like, okay, we're getting ready. We need more of these receptors. So when the brain produces this and some of it drips into the blood and goes down to the uterus now has additional receptors to receive it. And on the uterus, that's that expansion, the waves that are helping us to open the cervix and move our baby down and birth our baby. And we will actually have the highest high of oxytocin ever in our life in the moments after birth to help us to fall in love with our babies and to safely birth the placenta. And what's so important to know, as you said, is like oxytocin is kind of a shy hormone. In order to be produced, we have to feel safe, private, and unobserved. Dr. Sarah Buckley, another one of our Eat, Pray, Doula teachers who comes to Bali a lot with us, has done extensive research and wrote the Hormonal Physiology Report. And she says those 3 words again and again, so I'll repeat them for those listening, that in order to have a gentle, safe, pleasurable birth, you need to feel private, safe, and unobserved. And when you think about making love, how would it be like to be intimate and have a stranger walk in the room and ask you 3 questions? Like, no way, right?
I'm poking you down there and being like, how are you doing down here? Excuse me, you were in the middle of something and you didn't ask if you could touch me. Yeah.
Right.
I love that. It's so true. Like when I'm making love with my partner and like the potential of my son coming around, I'm like, oh, this is harder to get into that space of orgasm. Or, you know, if my landlord's around, I'm like, you know, it's a little bit trickier because of the sounds that I might make and I don't want to be heard or observed. 100%. I always tell people, I love this. I always tell people when they ask about my home birth experience and why I chose to have a home birth, I share it's kind of like birth is kind of like taking the biggest poop of your life. Like the biggest poop of your life ever. Now imagine that you're trying to take the biggest poop of your life in a public bathroom where there's stalls and people are walking in and out. There's, you know, you can hear their sounds, you can hear their feet, and you don't want to be observed. You might make a smell or a noise that you don't want other people to notice or hear. It's really hard to do that in a public bathroom. And I know men, especially because I know a lot of men in my life really like their privacy when it's time to use the bathroom, when they have to go number 2. And it's easier for me, but just like you can understand how hard it is to birth when there's people coming in and out, asking you questions, prodding you, poking you, saying, well, you're not moving fast enough. We're going to have to do this to you, putting pressure on you. Not to discount the work of the hospital staff. They are doing their best with their training. But the question is, how can we implement a little more privacy, a little bit more safety? And what was the third one?
Unobserved.
And that's huge. Yeah.
Huge. And it's important to say that like an observer can be another person, but an observer can be a fetal monitor. I'm with people in the hospital sometimes and they're staring at the monitor or listening to the monitor. So technology is an observer. And sometimes we're our own worst observer, like, oh, I just made that sound. Was that okay? What will people think, right? Or that smell just came out. Like, did anybody smell that? So I don't want people to think the observer can only be someone else. Really, birth is so deep and it's such a body experience, right? We have to feel so safe and so private that we can totally let go and get into truly altered state of mind. Our hormones are going to take us to what we call labor land, right? That really altered space. And anything that takes you into your thinking brain, your neocortex, if you're holding conversation, stimulation, if you won't let go to that altered space, you really block your hormonal flow. And I think so many labors today are so much longer and then end up with so much more technology because we don't feel safe and we stay in that alert space. And imagine being in that alert space trying to make love with a fetal monitor. Imagine if you had a monitor on, a blood pressure cuff, a couple strangers, and they said, you know what, just ignore me and go ahead and go at it. Like,
yeah. In the doula work that I've done in the hospital, I'll usually tell the couple when I can tell the mom's getting closer or getting really in her head, I'm like, you two go in the bathroom, turn on the shower, go make out, and just forget that everyone else is here. And we'll shut the door and I'll just be like, they're fine. Like, they're good. Just, they ask for some privacy for like an hour. And usually the staff will allow for something like that. I do remember when I was in labor with my son too, in the comfort of my home, which I'm so blessed to have had that experience. And the midwife was having car trouble. So her husband had to pick her up from the side of the road and then bring her. And things were moving really fast when they got there. Like, I was already, I think, 6 or 7 centimeters dilated. Having been at home with my husband and my dog all day just by ourselves. And we, when the midwife showed up with her husband, and I remember I was on the floor on all fours, and I was kind of in that state where I was just like, oh, I was just trying to feel into my body. And the midwife's husband was on my couch, and he had a Dallas Cowboys jersey on. And my son's father goes, oh, you're a Cowboys fan? And he's like, yeah. And they start talking football. And I just remember being like, I don't give a fuck about football. Like, it was like, why are you talking about football right now? I'm trying to deliver a child out of my vagina. And it was keeping me in that headspace alertness that you're talking about. And it wasn't allowing for me to get deep into that transcendent state that my body was really trying to get to. And I think that could be really challenging for a lot of women in a hospital setting, or even in a house setting if there are strangers coming by. So it's really important that we as women state what we need. Like, I'm grateful that I was just able to be really angry in that moment and let whatever words needed to come out. And that was his cue. He was like, okay, I'm out. And he left. And then I remember also when my son's father's mom walked into the bathroom when I was birthing on the toilet, because I ended up on the toilet and almost gave birth on the toilet, because from that floor state, my midwife checked me and she's like, oh, you're close. How long have you been on the floor like this? And I think I'd been there for like 2 hours. She's like, let's get you vertical. So she took me onto the toilet. And because of that, more upright position, gravity works. Gravity helps us to go, or helps us to stay on the earth. So things started progressing really quickly. And I remember being on the toilet and it felt like I was in a boxing ring. Like, it was like, okay, here we go. Here comes the contraction. And it was just like, I was all in. And then I would come out and I would just be in this like I'm not even present. I could see my body from like up above, and people were just like squirting water into my mouth and wiping my head. Like, it really felt like I was in a fight. But at that point, my son's father's mom walked in, so mother-in-law walked in, and she was not invited. So that's another thing. Oh. You have to be very clear in who is allowed into your space so that you feel safe. She was not invited, and she walked in and she goes, how are you doing? And I was like, I'm doing okay. She's like, well, it gets worse. And it just totally took me out of that space. And I was like, why would anybody do that? And luckily I was able to just be like, I'm close. Like, I can tell I'm there, and got into that space again and delivered my son. We had to move me from the toilet onto a birthing stool, which was just a couple of feet away. And my son came out of me. It was so beautiful. And I remember just holding him, and that's when the oxytocin flowed through. Because moments before, it was like, I can't do this. And then it was like, I can do that 10 million more times. That was the most amazing experience ever. And all of the challenge was forgotten, like completely forgotten, because my body was flooded with the oxytocin.
Yeah, isn't that's so beautiful? But I'm sorry to hear that people disturbed you in the middle of that process.
It's all part of the journey though, too, at the same time. It was, I feel, me learning how to speak my truth. And that's a big part of, I think, a lot of our journeys, especially as women, because we haven't been able to speak our truth or allowed to for so many years. Yeah.
So true. And I think birth has, taking birth away, I should say, from us in many ways has really put women down in general, because as you know, when women find their power in birth, they bring that power into mothering, but into every aspect of who they are in their life. And I always say to people, there's power in birth. You either claim it or you give it away. There's like no neutral. And I think too many people don't realize, they just think I'm going to, show up at the hospital and my provider, whoever they are, will take care of me, but that's giving your power to someone else. And birth is just a day you will never forget. Hearing your story, you can hear that, and our emotions are right there. So it's a day that we all need to be educated about so that we can really do it in the way that serves us.
I totally agree. Yeah, and I feel that there's so much power within the collective right now of the divine feminine rising up, and women speaking their truth, finding their gifts and sharing that. And I feel really grateful to be here at this time on the planet to witness this whole journey. And I'm excited to see how Orgasmic Birth continues to ripple out into the world. I know so Debra has a film for our listeners. It's called Orgasmic Birth. How can they find Orgasmic Birth?
It's really simple, orgasmicbirth.com. And if you go there, you either can rent the film or buy the film all in digital. And we have 6 different languages on the website. So choose your right language when you're choosing to rent or buy. But if you join our mailing list right now, we'll also send you a 50% off coupon for either rental or purchase. So
love that. Thank you. And Debra sends out wonderful emails weekly all about orgasmic birth, the hormones, pleasure, joy, all kinds of great stuff. And I know you just co-authored a new book. Is that correct? Or is it you? You wrote it by yourself?
Just me. This is my first book, all on my own. Really, really fun. It's called The Ultimate Guide to Sex After Baby, Secrets to Love and Intimacy. And in my journey working with Orgasmic Birth, and I've been speaking and learning from people all over the world, we talk so much about the power of birth and connecting our sexuality. But what I heard so often is so many people, mostly those with awesome births, had great sex in the years after a baby because they really got in touch with the power of their sexuality, and their body. But sadly, so many people have been put down in birth, and as you said, traumatized or suffered in different ways. And many times they continue to suffer and have a disconnect from their body, their sexuality, and intimacy that went into parenting. And we know from the statistics that people have a very high divorce rate as new parents. And a lot of that sometimes can stem from a lack of intimacy or a real disconnect in their sexuality. So I thought, you know what? I'm hearing all these stories, and it finally reached the time where I said, okay, it's time for another book where I can capture the stories of both joy and challenge and put together the tips that I consistently learned, and I learned for myself. My first marriage also ended in divorce. And this is the book that I wish I had had as a new mother that would have really opened up things that no one was talking about. So for me, it's kind of taking 50 Shades of Grey and making it real. It's not fiction. It's real stories of what's possible and how you can get there.
I love that. Congratulations on authoring your book. That's so exciting.
Thank you.
Yeah, I can only imagine the effort and the discipline and the hard work it took to create that. So congratulations.
Thank you. Yes, it feels like a birth. It's another long labor and lots of joy once you welcome that baby.
Yeah, and it's going to continue to like have its own family as it spreads around the world and shares these ideas of intimacy and joy with couples. That's so wonderful. I love that. You touched on something else that I would love to share. Oh, what was it? You talked about, intimacy after birth, obviously. Intimacy after birth is so important. And I know that when I'm feeling disconnected or not receiving intimacy, that I'm just not as happy, and that can be created with myself or with a partner. But it's such an important part of our humanity, which I think ties this whole thing together, is that feeling of intimacy, that feeling of pleasure and joy that we can create through our physical, spiritual, mental body, and how that is just like one of the most important things of our human experience.
Yeah. I think it's so true. And it's really interesting how, like, if you look at definitions of sexuality and intimacy, they really honor that it's a part of all of us. Like, that's an essential part. Like, I often think about it, like, could you imagine like going a day without something to drink, without water? Like, we couldn't survive, and we wouldn't think about it. But how do we let that part of ourselves not be considered as essential as all other nutrition and food and water? And yet it really is. Science honors it, research honors it, and yet we don't talk about it. So it's so important we do, right? And help every person to have that connection. And I love how you said, Noelani, that it can be to ourselves. You know, the first person we have to be intimate with and love is ourselves. And then that brings it out into relationships with our children, our partners, and others.
Absolutely. And I love what you said about how, it's not discussed very much, and it's such an important thing. I grew up in a household where we could not talk about sexuality at all, and I was not very informed at all. And I know a lot of my friends that I've spoken to have shared that as well, that their parents they didn't talk about sex at all. Like, it wasn't okay to talk about that at all. It's not safe to go there. You couldn't even mention it in the household. And that's how I grew up. And I really want to create a different story for the next generation, because it's the most natural thing. It's how we all got here. Like, how is that possible that we live in a society that it's not okay to talk about sexuality, but that's how we all got here. In fact, my son and I were at the beach yesterday together, and we were changing out of our swimsuits to put on dry clothes for the bike ride home, because it was pretty windy and kind of cold. And so it was just funny as I had my sarong wrapped around me and kind of made my own little dressing room so that people couldn't see me on the beach. And I was just like, this is so ridiculous that I'm ashamed, he's ashamed to be in our bodies when we all have bodies. We all got here because of someone's body, two people's bodies, and yet there's this deep conditioning and trauma around our bodies are not okay to show. It's illegal. It's against the law. And it's interesting to have that concept so in your face, and really ask the question, why is that the norm? Why is that the social norm? And I understand, our bodies are sacred. And yes, there is this very sacred and intimate part of me that wants to honor my body. But at the same time, how do we release the shame?
Yeah, and such an important question. And I have to say, looking back through all of history, it wasn't always like that. I think that people have to get a perspective that even in parts of the world today, it's not like that. There are some cultures that our bodies are more sacred and celebrated, and there isn't shame around them. But also, if we look back in time, very much that didn't happen. And, a lot of it has to do, and I, say this not as a gender, but as a philosophy and patriarchy. there was this time where the feminine was more put down. And I think especially when we look at birth stripping sexuality away, motherhood and sex, like that's another push the button. Like you can be sexual as long as you're single, but now that you're a mother, okay, now you're in another box. So there are just so many issues we have around body image, around sexuality, around birth and sexuality, motherhood and sexuality. And it's so great to have these discussions, and people that are listening, if your buttons are being pushed, I always say grab a piece of paper and start journaling, because you need to really look at where is that coming from. Do you feel comfortable with staying in that place? Or do you really push your button and say, I'd like to feel more comfortable. I'd like to open that up. And I think that's where I'm saying, let's have these discussions and journey together. That's what our book is about. That's what I'm doing a lot now. And you are too. We're here to say, let's have these difficult conversations, but that's what stretches us. And in the end, can help us find that comfort zone in who we are, because our body for now is a part of who we are, and we need to love every part of it.
Absolutely. And the truth of the matter is we're all sexual beings. That's how we all got here on this planet. I love that. My son is 12 now, so he's hitting that puberty stage, and his friends are starting to talk about girls, and I love talking about it with them because it wasn't safe for me to do that as a child. I did not ever want to discuss that with my parents. And so it's really fun to witness how they open up about it when I start to ask questions and remember what it was like to be that age and engage with them. And I can see how my son is kind of like, Mom's talking about this. I'm a little bit uncomfortable, but then his friends will continue to engage and ask me questions like, well, when did you first have sex? And when did you do this? And asking me all kinds of questions. And a lot of their ideas that they have are completely incorrect. Like just they're misinformed is the thing. Like understanding about condoms, STDs, those kinds of things. There's even some blue waffle. Have you heard of the blue waffle STD? I didn't know. I didn't know what it was either. But the boys, for my son's birthday, we had a sleepover and they were asking me all kinds of questions. And I pulled out this really great book that's written for children to talk about sexuality. I forget the name of it. I'll have to share that in the podcast notes. But the boys were all about it. They were looking at it and like, oh my God, look at that. And it was showing the different human bodies at different ages, like young boy, pubescent boy, 20-year-old, and then older man, same with a woman. And they were just like, wow, and it normalized it. Like, this is okay. This is what it looks like. And so one of the questions was, well, how do you get the blue waffle STD? And I was like, the what? And I was like, I've never heard of that. I don't know what it is. And I was like, just be smart, be safe, wear a condom, make sure that you both have consent, like really pushing the consent.
Right.
I Googled later the blue waffle STD, and it's a fictitious STD that supposedly makes your reproductive genitalia look like a blue waffle. So it's just funny how misinformed they were. And I just kept laughing and rolling my eyes at almost every question and comment they had, because I was like, where are you guys getting this information from? Like, I'm so glad that you feel comfortable and safe enough to talk to me about this, because if not, who's going to tell you? And,
right.
Yeah. And I know it's very uncomfortable for my son, but then he's starting to ask me questions too, because he's seeing that his friends are comfortable. So it's kind of cool to talk to me about it. And it's been really funny because it's very out of the norm for our community and our society, I think, for me to be talking about this to the 12-year-old boys. And I did share it with their moms. I was like, hey, this is what's happening. The boys have been asking me questions. So their moms were in the loop too. And they were like, oh, thank you for talking about it. And I shared with them, what we discussed in case they wanted to share different ideas or thoughts coming from their
great.
or their backgrounds. I wanted to be really transparent, but maybe they're not having those conversations at all, which I think is probably the case with some of the moms, and that's totally fine. Like, I think people need to talk about what they're comfortable with, and it just brought so much joy to me to see them able to open up about a subject that is so faux pas, like it's not okay to talk about. And I think we need to normalize that so that we can create these different, more empowering experiences, not only for the young men, but for the young women. Like, start to share with them, did you know that your nipple actually has more than one hole in it? For example, like when I started breastfeeding my son and I had like 5 different squirts of milk coming out of my nipple, I was like, what? Why did nobody ever tell me that I had more than one hole here? Like, how did I go my whole entire life without realizing this? And I think just sharing the facts and the information is the first step into feeling empowered in our bodies and comfortable with sexuality, intimacy, and ultimately loving ourselves.
Yes. And I just want to say how wonderful that you had this conversation with your son and his friends. I think this is so important. And these are things that as more people get comfortable themselves in their bodies and their sexuality, they'll be able to have these conversations. And this is how we're ultimately going to take the shame away, right? Like your son is really blessed to have, and his friends, that information and make it, presented in a way that feels healthy and normal and that questions are acceptable. So that's awesome.
Yeah, thank you. It was really fun, and it really feels like we're pushing boundaries with it. So I'm sensitive to what they have already been conditioned in their school environment, but also just asking questions and then not pushing it. So it's a fun balance to experience. Yeah. Thank you.
That's awesome. But we need to do that with everyone, like just really understanding all that our body has. And I love with all the holes on your nipples and that. But I even find like a lot of people don't even understand like the clitoris and that it's 8,000 nerve endings and that it's just the tip that we're really used to thinking of the clitoris and how it really is all through the labia and the vagina. I mean, which brings it back to why is birthgasm possible, because the baby's coming down and hitting all those nerves that their only purpose is pleasure. Like the clitoris has no other purpose. So like so many women don't fully know even all that their body's capable of because again, no one's told them and we've had shame around it.
Hey, if you're enjoying the show, give it a like, comment, and subscribe so that others like you can find this podcast. And now back to the show. So let's talk more about the clitoris. I love this because even saying that word, I'm like, we don't say that very much around here. When people do start to talk about it, it's kind of like, oh, did she just say that word? But I think that this needs to become normalized as well, that this is our point of pleasure as women, and it brings so much joy. And what would it be like to live on a planet where women are happier? How would the guys feel? How would the children feel? How would the entire world be if women were happier and receiving more pleasure? Yes, please. Yes, please.
Totally. And, I have to say, not only do women are not educated on their own clitoris and how big it is and how many nerve endings and all that's possible with it, but that also means that most partners and men also are not educated on it because sexual education both in school is failing and not preparing us in really good and healthy ways. And then as you said, so many parents themselves didn't receive good sexual education that felt whole and healthy in the home, that they're not prepared in how do we pass that forward, right? So it takes discussing it and having education so that you can feel comfortable to then pass that on. But the clitoris, to me, I mean, are you kidding me? Ancient civilizations knew more about the clitoris than we do today because we shrouded it in so much shame.
Yeah, that's so funny. I love that analogy of we put people on the moon before we understood the clitoris. one of the things that I wanted to share that I think is so important in finding pleasure and experiencing joy, and we've kind of touched on this before in the podcast, is, you know, that feeling of safety, that feeling of not being observed. And one of the things that I notice for me in particular is if I am feeling observed, for example, then I'm not going to be as expressive with my voice. And as a birth worker, you know how much the voice and the throat chakra is connected to our cervix, our yoni, this entire second chakra of creativity. And so let's talk about the voice and our connection to our center of pleasure and joy and our birthing space. Will you share a little bit about that?
Yes. And you know what it makes me think of, and I know you know her too. Do you remember in Ipre Dula Ibu Yeshi? She's a great Indonesian midwife. And I just always think of her when I think of this, because I remember one day I was talking with her and I said, if you could just give one tip for how to have an orgasmic birth, what would it be? And she said to me, when these lips are smiling, so are these lips. And that deep connection, right, of kind of our mouth and our voice and our yoni. And I just love that. It reminds me, the smile. That's what we want for pleasure and that. But yeah, so important when we're holding anything in, when we're closed down, right? Especially around the mouth and the throat chakra, we're holding everything in. And if we're talking about labor and birth, anything you hold in holds the baby in, whether it's an emotion you're holding in, your voice you're holding in. I mean, we are just so one that we have to let go. But in life, when we hold in and we don't give voice into that chakra, we're also creating often dis-ease, right, in our body, and not really living and speaking our truth, which will internalize and often bring on illness. So it's so important that we give our voice, and whether that's in our sexuality, in birth, and just in life, that connection to our health and to our creative power, our creative root. When women, and I'm past bleeding now, but when we're bleeding, that creative energy is seated there. Thus you create life, which is the most creative thing that you do, you know? And it's so important that we find that way to express. We always say once we stop bleeding, that creative energy comes up and more goes into the third eye, into, you know, the wise woman, and having a thinner veil between worlds and vision. And so being able to bring that creative energy up, because we've really developed the root chakras, and kind of moving up so that the power can move into other ways. But women that are in those menstrual years and really need to develop that creative energy, really need to honor that sacred seat of sexuality. And as you own that, so many other things will manifest.
I love that. Yeah, I really feel that when I became a mother, that's when I found my voice. That's the moment where I really became, or started to become, who I am. Like, it was a total rite of passage of becoming a woman and knowing that I had permission to stand in my truth, and that what I speak is important. And that came through those sounds, those very primal guttural sounds that I was making in the labor process of birthing my son. And because I was comfortable in my home, I really don't think I could have made those sounds in a hospital and felt okay or safe or comfortable at all making those sounds. But they were very deep from this place, from my yoni, my uterus. It was all from down here. It was very, just so powerful. And it felt like just creativity was moving through me, and I was just the conduit. That's what it felt like. And from that experience, I started to play the ukulele, I started to sing, and now I've released a few albums, and I'm actually teaching vocal activation courses now. And all of that came from that experience. And I went through the phase of doing my yoga teacher training journey, because I was really enjoying prenatal yoga. That's how I started to get comfortable with my body, the yoga was really helping me to understand my body's movements and feel comfortable with it. And then I was like, I want to teach prenatal yoga so I can empower other women, which led to becoming a doula, because I was like, I really want to be there for them in the birth experience. And what I was noticing in the birth experiences is that women were not vocalizing. They did not have the tools. They did not have their voice. And even if they didn't want certain people in the birth room, they would tell me that, I really don't want so-and-so to show up. And I'd say, well, have you talked to them about it? No, I'm really afraid. Well, that's something you really need to express to them, because it's your choice, it's your birth. And so I've shifted from focusing on being a doula to let's go back some steps and let's give women the tools to find their voice, because that's what we really need. And as women, when we find our voice, we can share those tools with others so that it inspires and empowers them, and especially the next generation. And so that's been really fun. I'm currently actually teaching a course right now, and we just finished our 3rd session yesterday out of 4. And I've already seen so much progress in our group. We have 23 students right now, and they are just flourishing and realizing all of these things about themselves that they never knew before, because they didn't explore and they didn't ask questions. They didn't have the tools or the practices to take them on this journey of the power of our voice. And you have a really great mug that I saw earlier. Can you show us what your mug says? Because I think that's such an important message.
It's so important. Thoughts become things. Choose the good ones. And that's really setting our intentions, right? Like, that's why I love this mug to kind of drink with it, because we all deserve to be heard. As you said so well, it's so great you're doing those courses to help people find their voice in life and really connect to their truth. And especially when it comes to around birth, like, you should not give up your truth in birth. And yet I think so many women are used to just literally being put down in birth, not having their voice heard. I mean, again, the medical system means well, and it certainly, for some people, it's essential, but too many times it strips us of our identity, of our voice. And we feel, as a patient, we want to be kind of that good girl syndrome. We don't want to rock the system, so we lose our voice in it. And it's just so sad, because birth is that opportunity to not only find your voice, as you did so well, that power then will be with you forever. So really putting in the time to unlock it and question, why would you not give truth to what you want, especially on such an incredible day like the day you're bringing life into the world?
Absolutely. Yeah, I really don't think I had any understanding of the power of word or the power of my own voice before I gave birth. And I came from a place of being a very shy little girl to now performing in front of people and teaching people how to use their voice. And so it's just, I hope that for any listeners out there who are feeling shy or timid, that you are inspired by this journey, that you can find your voice, and it's there and it's waiting to come out. It's this gift that only you have, and your ideas, your thoughts, your words are important, and that's your medicine for this planet. Those are your gifts that need to be shared, and that's why you've come here. So thank you so much, Debra. This has been such a great conversation today. I would love to just ask you a couple of questions so that we can share with our listeners. What are some rituals that help you to stay focused on your path and your journey?
So I have a couple that are my daily rituals. First of all, always every morning, an attitude of gratitude. Really, what am I grateful for? And even in the middle of challenge or whatever, there's always things we can be really thankful for. So for me, gratitude is really key. Second is meditation. And I love walking meditation. I certainly love kind of mindful meditation, sitting still, but my husband years ago built me a beautiful labyrinth in my backyard. And I love to walk the labyrinth. And kind of that's my meditation, to set an intention to walk it and to meditate in the middle. And my third every day is dance, just moving and getting my body to go where it feels to go. It's not about what it looks like. It's about, for me, really connecting and feeling and honoring and celebrating and expressing whatever it is that's inside me that needs to be expressed. So those are my top 3 that I do every day.
I love it. Thank you for sharing. I appreciate that so much. I love to dance too. Okay, the second question I want to ask is, what ripples do you want to create as you envision a new earth?
So ripples that I really want to create is that we heal birth, because I think that birth is really the beginning place of so much of not only who the new being is, how they're welcomed into the world with kindness, love, gentleness, and respect. But I think, as you said so well, we are birthed ourselves as women anew in the process, and partners too that are there. It's an opportunity for everyone to come together with more respect, more gentleness, more compassion, kindness, love, ecstasy, and I believe orgasmic births. But I really want us to focus that birth is a pivot point. And if we could heal birth around the world so that every person had that kind of respectful, safe care, I think it would be a new humanity. So that's one place. There's so many ways of healing that our planet needs right now, but I do believe birth is a really important place to start.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. It's been such a pleasure to speak with you today about all of your work with Orgasmic Birth. Again, to our listeners, thank you for listening, and you can find Debra's work at orgasmicbirth.com. Be sure to check out her email list and her film, as well as her new book. What's the name of the new book again?
The Ultimate Guide to Sex After Baby. You'll find that on our website as well.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Debra. Blessings to you, and aloha.
Aloha, blessings.
Thanks for listening to the show. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, give it a like, comment, and subscribe. In addition to my YouTube channel, you can find me on Instagram and Facebook at Noelani Love. Follow me there to stay in the loop about upcoming retreats, online courses, new jewelry collections, giveaways, and how you can be a part of my team.
I wanna go deep, deep, deep in your jungle. I wanna get lost, lost, lost in your arms. I wanna feel high, high, high on your vibe. I wanna feel love, love, love in my life. Am I chasing dreams, or do I let them come to me? I can call you in and let you go. I'm somewhere in between, yes and no.
Somewhere in the middle.
Freedom, space, desire, the want, the need, the fire. When's enough, enough? I don't wanna play rough. I wanna see the world, but you are my universe. I could live inside your eyes, inside your kiss. It's your love I miss, an ocean of bliss. I wanna go deep, deep, deep in your jungle. I wanna get lost, lost, lost in your arms. I wanna feel high, high, high on your vibe. I wanna feel love, love, love in my life. Heaven on earth would always be like this. I'll keep singing and dancing around the world. Maybe you'll find me on the other side. One thing I know, my love will not hide. I'll come back to me and create my own reality. Am I living in a fantasy? fantasy. I wanna go deep, deep, deep in your jungle. I wanna get lost, lost, lost in your arms. I wanna feel high, high, high on your vibe. I wanna feel love, love, love in my life. You are my roots, roots, roots. You are my water. You are my air, air, air. You are my fire. You make me I. You make me I.
So we praise you. We honor you. We love you, Mother Earth.